Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Nadia Ali. I'm the director of the Center for Middle East Studies here at Brown University. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's event, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth. Myself and my colleague, Catherine Spellman-Poots, will be in conversation with Palestinian artists Basel, Abbas, and Ruanne Abou-Rahme. And today's event is a first in a new series that Catherine and I, so that's the Brown Center for Middle East Studies and the Columbia University Middle East Institute, are co-hosting. And the series is entitled Gender and Body Politics, Arts in the Middle East and its Diasporas. Today's online conversation with Basel Abbas and Ruanne Abou-Rahme will be discussing their latest projects against the background of their wider art practice that is engaged in the intersections between performativity, political imaginaries, the body, and virtuality. So this conversation is part, as I said, of a wider series that is trying to explore the intersections of art, gender, and body politics in the Middle East and its diasporas. So in this series, we are trying to examine the intersecting inequalities and body politics expressed, represented, and transgressed in both visual and performance art. And this is against the backdrop of war and conflict, the rise of authoritarian regimes, displacement and diaspora mobilization, but also Islamophobia, ongoing Orientalist depictions, and challenges linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so today's event is also co-sponsored by the New Directions in Palestine Studies here at Brown University, as well as the Center for Palestine Studies and the Center for the Studies of Muslim Societies at Columbia University. And now let me introduce my friend and colleague, Catherine Spellman-Poots, to you. Catherine is a sociologist on faculty at Columbia's Middle East Institute and the Aga Khan University in London. Her research focuses on women and gender dynamics in Muslim societies in the UK and US. Catherine has a particular interest in rituals and cultural production within the context of diasporic spaces and their connections to wider social movements. Catherine, over to you.
Right. Hello. Hi. Thank you, Nadia, and warm welcome, everyone. Basel and Ruanne, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today, especially around the same time as the launch of your work at MoMA, which just opened a couple days ago. I went yesterday and found it mesmerizing and viscerally powerful. At the same time, it's thought-provoking and raises significant questions. So before we begin the discussion, I wanted to introduce you and your work. So Basel Abbas, Ruanne Abou-Rahme have worked together for a number of years across a range of sound, image, text, installation, and performance practices. Their work, largely research-based, is engaged in the intersections between performativity, political imaginaries, the body, and virtuality. Across their works, they probe a contemporary landscape marked by seemingly perpetual crisis and an endless present, one that is shaped by a politics of desire and disaster. In their projects, they find themselves excavating, activating, and inventing incidental narratives, figures, gestures, and sites as material for reimagining the possibilities of the present. And largely their approach has been one of sampling material, both existing and self-authored, and recasting them into altogether new scripts, a few of which we'll be exploring and discussing in today's session. Ruanne and Basel were fellows at the Academie de Kunstgeweld in Cologne in 2013, and artists in residence at the Delphina Foundation in London in 2009. They are recipients of the Sharjah Biennale Prize in 2015 and the Brush Prize in 2016. Their most recent publication, And Yet My Mask is Powerful, was published by Printed Matter in New York. And I'd say I just finished reading my colleague Gil Hochberg's work. She dedicated a whole chapter to that piece, which was really wonderful. Their latest work, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth, was co-commissioned by MoMA and the Dia Art Foundation, both in New York, And as I mentioned, a segment of Amnesia titled Only Sounds That Tremble Through Us is currently installed at MoMA and runs through June 26th. So I'm sure we'll learn a lot more about all of this during today's discussion. So Nadia, I'll turn it over to you for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, welcome, Ruanne and Basel. So we've been hosting quite a number of Palestinian, many academics and intellectuals, and I feel there's really a shift happening in terms of generation. And I also get that sense with your artwork. And so, in the past, I think whether it's artists, intellectuals, or academics, the main focus was to try to tell the narrative of the Palestinian, to challenge mainstream narratives and to really alert people, educate people about the suffering and injustice of Palestinians. But your work, while clearly very much historically grounded, tries to engage more with the present and the future. So can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of vision and aims you're pursuing with your art? Don't know who'd like to start out first.
Well, Bassett is going to kind of sort of the first few questions here.
Okay.
I'll answer after, but let's just share our screen first.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Start answering, I guess, but I think that
oh, sorry, just 1 second. We have to bring you back. How did that? Can't see anyone.
Okay, so I'll start talking and we can figure this out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because we can't see anyone.
I see. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we can't see you at all.
So we see you.
Okay.
But,
we'll get back once we yeah. So yeah, I think that's obviously a very sort of big aspect of our practice and kind of our thought process in terms of how our work kind of came to be together. And I think that we with each project, we're always asking this like basic question about, who cares, right? And why are we doing what we're doing? And most of the time, it's really like thinking about what people are doing and people's practices in the present moment. A lot of I think in the beginning of our practice, many people maybe thought that it was in the realm of fiction, but really we always thought about it more about projection and how we can sort of take something existing and push it to its maybe sort of full potential, even if in the sort of realm of the imagination, because also a lot of essentially we obviously grew up in a sort of colonized spaces, but also the colonization wasn't just just not on your just body, but also on your imaginary. And so it became really important for us to be able to sort of somehow break that apart or expand the potential of the imaginary even, and with the concern of our community and our people. And that's always in the present and in the future. And of course, the past and every moment we live is obviously a accumulation of other past moments. And I feel like we think about the past more as in a sort of call that we are sort of like a call that exists that we respond to, and we continue to take and move forward more and more, and we see our call maybe in our practice and our work as well, that like can exist in the present and hopefully in the future. So yeah, I think and obviously like so we don't really see a generational separation in terms of politically speaking, I would say. I mean, it's more maybe within the realm of form or within the realm of, but it's almost like the work that other people did was necessary in order for us to take this and move forward, something else with it, right? I mean, so yeah. That's,
Yeah.
I don't know if you have something to say.
No, not really.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense, that it's sort of building on, I mean, you couldn't do what you're doing now if other people wouldn't have done what they did. I mean, I get that in a way, but it also links to the idea of the archive. I mean, there's now lots of thinking about the archive and sort of challenging traditional ways of thinking about the archive. I mean, last semester I was in conversation with Gil Hochberg, of course, who writes a lot about your work as well as an, illustration of, the way that you engage the archive in very creative and new ways. So can you tell us a little bit, what does the archive mean in the context of your work?
Also,
that's something that we've been thinking through, I think, since we started. I always think that should I just
of course,
something even though we had
perfect.
divided.
Yes,
this is why it doesn't work for us to divide. But I always think that the question of the archive for us is really a question of how we think about time, in the sense that, our practice has been very much about, thinking about time in a non-linear way, in the way that different moments across space and time fold in and out of each other. So for us, the question of the archive was always about the living archive, was the way in which what we perceive as something that's in the past or something that's archival is actually very much part of a living fabric that at any moment can actually be reactivated and rearticulated to do different things, right? So it's not this static, it's not this kind of static body that we're just looking towards to read what has happened, but very, very much more about what are the inscriptions that we can write and read within this living archive now as a form of resistance. So, for us, we've approached that in different ways. With our one of our projects, and yet my mask is powerful. We were really thinking about the archive, both in relation to a set of looted masks, but also, really thinking about the land and the vegetation as a living archive that is resisting colonial erasure. So it's we think about it in a very sort of expanded sense, I think. And I'll let you add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, like Ruanne said, there's so much to say about the archive because it's like such a big thing, and obviously like part of our practice, an intrinsic part of our practice, I would say. But I think that also it kind of also goes a little bit back to, as Ruanne was saying, like activating something in the present, because, again, like, why care about something if it's not like, who cares, right? Again, and so for us, it's like, how can you use this to activate something in the present, or how can it activate something in the now, or and I think that the idea of sort of like monopolies over bodies of knowledge was also something that we were thinking a lot about, as in like, how can you take, not just activate it, but also make it accessible to people, because collections and archives and even those words are problematic because of how they exist in the world and institutionally, and also, they show like there's so much power implicated in archives and collections, and so our the drive for us was always to sort of almost liberate the archive and make it something that is living now, as Ruanne was saying. And a big influence on us was, you know, someone like Aaron Schwartz, who wrote the Guerrilla Open Access Manifesto, which was all about that, you know, and he obviously paid with his life doing this. And so that has been a big influence on us, and even appears in our work, the manifesto that he wrote. And so I think this is a kind of, and our most recent work, which, I mean, I'll just quickly press on index actually, since it's right here. You know, it has this like collection. I mean, I don't know. I kind of problem. I don't want to call it. We have it the word index here, but we don't know what to call it, collection or an archive, because we want it to be something that's living and breathing, and and a lot of and in trying to make it like as a body, somehow they become like a body of knowledge that people can access and activate themselves. And so there's a call again in the work somehow, and through the art. Lots more to say, obviously, but I'll stop there for now. So it's
No, it's so interesting. I mean, it's sort of what I, you know, kind of the limited sort of, well, experience with your work, and, you know, reading about your work and seeing. I mean, it's, to me, it seems there is a sort of divergence. First, of course, there's the emphasis on the past. I mean, you know, historically, the archive is sort of linked to the past, but you're much more grounding it in the present, but I guess also in terms of the imagination, the vision for the future. But then also, you know, linked to that, and that I guess resonates a lot with feminist scholarship in terms of, you know, who is the one who produces knowledge, and I mean, decolonial knowledge production. And so, you know, that really challenging what is known and who is producing it. And I think that comes together really amazingly in your work. Before I'm going to hand over to Catherine, I just wanted to tell the audience that we have time for Q&A. So at any point, if you have any comments or questions, please put it in the Q&A function, and we'll get to it later. But now over to you, Catherine.
Yeah, no, thank you. That was really rich. When you mentioned the word resistance, that made me think of your current project, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth. And that takes as a starting point communities that are under perpetual threats and that experience extreme threat. And it illustrates how communities not only resist erasure, but claim space and their sense of self and their sense of being. We were taken by the beautiful title of this work. And from what I understand, it was taken from the writer Roberto Bolaño's work from 1976 and from Realist Manifesto. So first, can you talk about Bolaño's work and in relation to yours? And more broadly, what are some of the main ideas that underpin your new work?
First, Bolaño, so much. I mean, there's a mainly like a work we have called Incidental Insurgents, which is basically has maybe so much, maybe a quarter of that text. There's so much text in that work. It's from one book called Abbas Detectives. And, you know, first I think that my entry point to Bolaño was really formal, I think, in the sense that sort of that book is written from multiplicity of like positions, like him, and including himself and like the sort of, you know, the people around him, and, you know, so it's kind of becomes like, you know, the poet and the anti-poet, the artist and the anti-artist. And I feel that like that was a form that in literature form that really informed like, I feel the sort of different vantage points that of entry into our work, but also how to sort of expand something that, you know, rather than take something that you're researching and sort of like, you know, making it more focused, you sort of open it up to possibilities. And I feel formally that was really influential on my practice in general. I mean, Ruanne will probably have a lot to say about Bolaño as well, because she's a much bigger fan than I am. But, well, you know, I mean, but and I'll quickly say, Amnesia, because it's like such a big project, I'll try to give like a little bit of a background on it before we go in depth with it. But essentially, as you said, Amnesia does, you know, think about communities that are under perpetual threat and thinking about how these communities counter this threat. But I feel that it's somewhat a little bit important to think about sort of how this work even began, because it actually wasn't a project. Like we didn't sit down and say, oh, let's make a project about this. And, you know, it started more like a gesture that was very sort of, just like something that we needed to do. It was basically during 2011 uprisings in Egypt and in Tunis, 2010, 2011. And it was, you know, we were experiencing a lot of what was happening online through YouTube and Facebook and social media and Twitter. And I feel that, you know, we were in a sort of, in Palestine, we were in a particular position where, you know, not for the first time, you know, it's like you are part of the Arab world, but you're also very isolated and separated from it. And so we're part of this thing, but we're also experiencing it online on these screens. And basically, it began as a gesture to sort of try to, so I would maybe see something, many things online, and I would want to show it to someone the next day or share it with someone. And you go back and maybe you search Tahrir Square or Cairo or, you know, Tunis or something, and you get, you know, hundreds of results from the last hour or something. So you can't really like locate that moment that you sort of wanted to share with someone. And so first we began saving the links, and then, as we all know, that obviously doesn't last very long, because, you know, sometimes very quickly the link's not available the next day. So you're like, oh. So then we started downloading this material, essentially. It was just that was basically where that stopped. It was just this material that we ended, and for a couple of years, we were basically collecting that material. It was sitting on our computer. And obviously, we were having all these discussions and conversations about the archive, problematizing all of this, and, you know, but it was really like developed into a work necessary. And obviously, then the material, the reality on the ground, obviously, as we all know, shifted, but also the material we were collecting shifted, the material as well shifted. But essentially, we found ourselves collecting moments of performance and music and people singing, but not like professionals, people just everyday people in their living rooms or in the streets. And we're really attracted to this material. Something about it was magical for us, and we kept downloading it. And then, you know, obviously after starting to look at it and amassing a lot of it, we not only began to notice that this material has actually increased like majorly in the last period, but also that this material was increasingly coming out of communities that were under complete threat of erasure. Essentially, this was a way that people were holding on to themselves and holding on to the community and holding on to space. And that was essentially how we arrived to the collection. And then from there, we decided to, as we sort of do a lot with our works and as how we treat collections or archives, and, you know, we started thinking about how we could take these practices and take these and sort of activate them in different ways and push them to different potentials and spaces. And yeah, and then we decided to work with other performers in Palestine. We created new performances, sampling this collection that we amassed. And currently we have a web platform, which is what you're looking at, where we have this collection, we translated and transcribed a lot of the material, and we sort of, as much as we can, accessible of it, and created an installation. And yeah, it's an ongoing project, but just that's like sort of parameters in a nutshell, because it's such a large, expansive project. And yeah, I mean, even though we were only just collecting material in 2010, 2011, essentially it kind of started from then, you know, in terms of like its line of trail or lines of thought and how we arrived to it.
No, I think I just answered the next question.
Yeah, it's a lot, but like you said, it's kind of expansive in a way.
It's extraordinary the way that you're connecting all these different fragments and doing it both online, but how it's then seamless in your installation at MoMA as well. It's really powerful. And it reminds me of a project that I worked on between with a group of anthropologists between 2011 and 2013. Anthropologists who were working in very different parts of the world, but were all experiencing different protest movements. And they were all rooted in their own historical particularities and facing their own struggles in their different locales. But through aesthetics and through the arts, they started to speak to each other and sort of build solidarity through chanting, through songs, through claiming squares, and really started to gain energy and support through each other. So your work reminded me a lot of what was happening during that period. I don't know, Nadia, if I can just talk a little bit about text now, which ties into Bolaño's work. I was really fascinated by the snippets and passages of text that run across both online and your work at MoMA. And for example, you have some passages that I think are taken from Nasser Abou-Rahme's article in Critical Times, which was published in 2021. And then in the installation, you have other shorter but really powerful lines. And I don't want to put them out of order, but I just jotted some down when I was there yesterday. For example, those who chant do not die. The land is calling, being where you're not allowed to be. So can you talk about the process of choosing the passages and how they inform and link to the sights and the sounds and the people that you work with, the artists and the dancers? And do they respond to these passages that you've chosen? Do they know them about those passages before you're working with them? I'm just wondering how it all just comes together in the way that it does.
I mean, there's different. So in what you quoted, there's text from songs, but there's also text that we wrote, which is actually the song "The Land Is Calling," and it's actually a text that we wrote. It's a postscript of sorts, so it was written after the process of creating the performances. So there's all these. I think there's all these different temporal moments in the text almost. So what we started with the performers was really the text from the songs that people are singing, right? Which are, I think what was interesting for us was really spending time with these songs and these chants and feeling how much the words are actually ours and not ours. So it's it's sort of, how does the song then sort of like testify to a collective, even in the absence of a clear collective. So really thinking of how it's embodied in the song, it's embodied in the words. And then, I mean, we can talk more about this later, but it's also embodied in the actual movements and gestures. So with the performers, we really spend a lot of time with the songs themselves. And how we created the performances was really, because the archive is actually quite large. So we had selected about 15 videos for each performer because we know them quite well. So we kind of have been thinking about what may resonate with them. And then it was really just about being with these moments and thinking about what can happen when we linger in a broken part of a song, whether it's the words or the melody, the rhythm, and then really trying to embody that in these performances that we created through improvisation, essentially. I mean, the performance is not really a performance. It's something that we were living together, and in that way, really thinking about how these words shift and sort of kind of mutate across spaces and times and across places that we can't reach. So a lot of the material that we were looking at from Iraq and Syria, we in Palestine can't go there and they can't come to us. It was really about all the sort of inscriptions and the echoes that we could feel in the song itself, and really thinking about how it opens into kind of the idea of a kind of collective room that is yours and not yours. So that and then in terms of Nelson's article, I mean, we also spent a long time thinking with other writers, and they really shape the way we think about what we're trying to get to and the language that we are articulating it in. And so it was important for us to have some of those. There's very few on the platform. There's much more really, but some of that residue there. And then as I said, when we came to actually start working on the installation, we wrote this postscript, which was all about being in the negative. Right, it went on for too long with that answer, but there's so many levels of text.
Yeah, I mean, and it also actually links though to the question that I was hoping to ask. Catherine, is it okay if I take it from there? Yes. So yeah, I mean, so the wider project, the series that Catherine and I are trying to think through and host people for it's about this idea of body politics, and we've both come to it in the context of mainly sort of gendered mobilization and activism, and we have been interested for a while in the idea of body politics in both the struggles to transgress and transform existing social, political and cultural norms, but also at the same time attempts by states and regimes and institutions to reinforce existing gender and political regimes. So your project, May Amnesia Never Kiss Us on the Mouth, very much puts embodied experiences at the center. So, if you can, I mean, you touched upon it already, but I mean, I see that, when I looked at the very, mesmerizing and fascinating online part, what happens is there that the various parts, and we only see snippets here, and maybe later on we can see a little bit more, but the various parts engage voice in the form of song and oral poetry, and they also engage body in the form of dance and gesture. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about these various embodied performances and experiences, and how do you more broadly engage voice and body in your work, and how do you perceive the body and body politics in the context of your project?
Yeah, I think I think what we felt very strongly was the way in which voice in the form of song and and oral poetry, and the body in the form of dance and gesture really becomes a political act of embodiment and becoming in a moment that's marked by various forms of violence, and in a moment where we all know that the body becomes a site of the violence. So it was again, it was us looking towards people's practices and seeing the extent to which the body and the voice becomes the material witness, and more than that, it becomes sometimes the last space from which you can resist that capture and that erasure, even momentarily. So a lot of times we're talking about essentially very fleeting moments, but they're very, there's something incredibly, incredibly powerful in them, and there is this call within them of another possible way of being. So that's where it starts for us. Just really thinking about how the voice and the body can splinter all of these regimes of power. And that goes all the way back to us watching, in the beginning, things unfolding in Tunis and things unfolding in Tahrir Square.
Yes.
And then, as things shifted on the ground, it became much more. It came to a different articulation, which isn't necessarily a clear moment of protest, right? But there's so much sort of resistance to that erasure within these moments. So it's really become somehow the last terrain. And what was interesting for us in terms of working with the performers is that they were all electronic musicians and one dancer who for them to just work with their body and their voice and nothing else was really taking them out of a certain zone. But in a way, it was incredibly, I think, liberating for them, because then their bodies and their voices become the resonator for all these different echoes that we're seeing in the archive that are coming to us from different times and places in Palestine and Syria and Iraq. So that way in which the body can become a resonator and the voice, and also the transgressions are really important, right? Because I think that at the same time, if you look at a lot of the archival material, there's a it's still incredibly gendered, right?
Yeah.
So it was really important for us in the performances that we created to break that and transgress against that, while also honoring those practices, but really think about the issues of like gender and sexuality that are there in the archive, and how can we sort of brush up against that in a way while still honoring these kind of collective resonances. So I don't know if I answered everything, but there's so much that I could say about this that
I actually want to add something about that, which is like Ruanne was saying, that I feel that very early on we thought about a lot about this in relation to sort of spatially, how we also present our work. So even here, maybe it's articulated the most, where you have sort of a literal embodiment happening in terms of the performers, but we've always thought about sound in that way, in a sense that a lot we were trying to constantly separate that sort of space between a sort of art object and like a viewer looking at the object and trying to constantly imbricate the viewer in the experience. And that obviously comes from thinking about the body and things that are very like straightforward, like crossing a checkpoint, and that all these things become activated, and you're very aware of them when you on a day-to-day in Palestine.
Yes.
And so that I feel very early on was really reflected in our practice, but very sort of maybe this is like a sort of culmination of a lot of that thinking in this project.
Yeah.
Add that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the experience in Palestine, you at moments when you're up against colonial power and other repressive systems, there is that very strong sense that your body is not yours, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that we have been thinking through and pushing up against for a very long time.
Yeah, and I mean, there is, I mean, one of the many things I like about your work is the sort of focus on the everyday. I mean, I think often when I think about the kind of body politics that are highlighted in relation to Palestine, it's the kind of more extreme versions, right? So, I mean, also very importantly, we have next year our postdoc in Palestinian studies, Ashjan Ajour from Gaza, who works on hunger strike. I mean, that is, of course, also an extreme form, right?
Yeah.
Then there is, of course, notorious suicide bomber. I mean, but what often falls off and what you sort of highlight are the kind of more, everyday, non-sensationalist, non-reported ways that people consciously or unconsciously use their bodies to transgress, but also to survive, I guess, and to, remain sane in a way. I mean, that's, yeah.
If I can just add to that, when I was watching your work of the montage with the performance in Iraq, alongside the two musicians and your friends, I think in the Nature of Palestine, it immediately reminded me of a conversation I had with a Libyan belly and hair dancer when I was in Tripoli years ago. And I was asking her about her work because she was quite well known and she was on TV in Libya and she had a big audience. But when I asked her about her work, she said it's not about performing. It's not about that at all. It's the one space where I can actually create a safe space that envelops my body, that I have my own constraints around me that I create where I dance within, and I can sort of commune with myself, with the cosmos, with nature, with anyone who I can. She didn't use the word escape, but she said she created her own space without any restrictions from the society that imposed a lot of restrictions on her. So I immediately thought of that work when I viewed your work, and was just fascinated as to how how did you pick the clip from Iraq, and where did you come across it, and do you have an enormous archive of similar
We have what's up on the platform is a very small fraction of what we've been living with. I mean, I see it all as moments that we've been living with and have we're in this constant conversation with. Also, some of the archive it was very hard for us to be with as well, and as Naja was saying, we're really interested in those moments that get overlooked. The particular video from Iraq, I mean, it just spoke to us so profoundly and so strongly in the way that it embodies a whole history of violence, but also is a resistance to that history of violence. And exactly as you said, she's in a state of being in it. It's not about the performance. And that's very much what we tried to do in the performances that we created. And they were very challenging for the performers. It was not an easy process. It was, of course, they had a lot of trust in us and they needed a lot of trust, but it was very much about, you know, embodying and being in the thing and letting it almost take you over so that you could, from it, even momentarily, like liberate, right? Be liberated in a way in that kind of fractional moment. So I think, you know, I think in some ways that video from Iraq was, you know, really shaped how we thought about sort of these, you know, embodied performances, right? It really kind of, yeah, it really informed how, you know, we would essentially spend hours on just being in certain movements, or and the performers would, you know, we thought also a lot about Sufi practices, to be honest with you, you know,
Yeah.
about how through those practices, we almost enter this hallucinatory state, and kind of thinking about how that hallucinatory state sort of can be a way that you resist a certain capture and become unbound. And then another thing that I think is important is the places that we did these performances are all places in Palestine that are really under threat from the Israeli army and the settlers. And it was very much about us being in those spaces together, and just sort of, you know, that connection to the land and being there. And there were a lot of cosmic things that happened. There were moments when, for example, when the dancer, we were in the Dead Sea, and as soon as she started performing, there was a very strong wind, and so she was almost like battling against the wind. And as soon as the performance stopped, it stopped. And so there were all these ways that we felt that the space itself and the land itself was almost kind of, you know, speaking to these, you know, to these moments. You know, so there was a big, yeah, that was a sort of big part of the work. I'll leave it there. It's a lot. Again, I feel like there's so
there's
much.
a lot to say. Yeah.
It's great questions. There's so much that we could say about every, you know.
No, thank you so much. Nadia, did you want to follow up with that, or do you
Yeah,
want
on the nature bit, and maybe
Yeah,
then,
that's a good idea.
yes, because so you mentioned nature, and I was, you know, that was something that struck me looking at the online platform. I mean, there is nature, and I've also, it reminded me because Ruba Saleh has been working on the Anthropocene in the context of Palestine, and so, you know, very much you know, recognition that the destruction of natural habitats of Palestinians has been very much part of Israeli settler colonialism. And in your work, I mean, people's bodies and voices seem to interact with nature, and sometimes nature seems to be speaking for itself almost. So how do you think of conceptualize nature in your work? I mean, you mentioned a little bit already.
Yes, a lot. Again, that can be like a whole conversation.
Yes.
So that what comes to mind really mostly is again, like when the moment when that was really sort of came to really fruition for us was in a project called "And Yet My Mask is Powerful," and you know, the sort of land and the vegetation became like a very important cause of sort of first the idea of this living archive, but also the idea of the land actually resisting itself. And so I mean, part of that project was us going to destroyed villages inside historic Palestine. And so, you know, a lot of these villages were concealed via vegetation. So, you know, pine trees and eucalyptus that is meant to sort of conceal the remnants of the destruction. But also what it does is, you know, something like eucalyptus sort of eats away at the nutrients of other vegetations around it. Of course, you know, the very sort of something that keeps happening is that this vegetation sort of goes on fire because it's not indigenous native vegetation, and so every year we have, you know, big fires, and you know
Actually,
that's
a big fire happened and it revealed the original sort of terracing that Palestinians would do.
Yeah.
So
that was
it's
last
also
year.
that-
That was recent. That was
It's
very
also
recent.
that the pine trees,
Yeah.
they actually they made the landscape for Palestinians
Unrecognizable,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
So it becomes, the landscape itself becomes like foreign to us, and it's not recognizable. But very sort of materially, let's say, in the project within Yet My Mask, we were trying to locate these villages, and there are apps and maps and things that a lot of people have done work on that, but sometimes, and there's even like GPS and things, but sometimes these areas are, you know, not on a GPS, so the GPS, you know, falls out and stops working, and so you have to sort of, you know, go back to sort of old way of like finding things, and there's no maps necessarily. So you begin, actually, you find that like the nature is what you know, tells you that you're close to the village or you're about to enter the village. So, you know, things like a cactus would demarcate the village, but also the original plantation comes back every spring and is there. And that was how we found a lot of the villages. And so it became such an important element, and it really like sort of, crystallized something in terms of our the land, but also the vegetation in the land, and how that has its own practice, and how we can sort of take also that practice and project it and amplify it and take it into other realms and spaces, and yeah, I think,
yeah, I mean, we had that sense of just how all these non-human like life forms were in these villages that were meant to be sites of trauma and destruction, and yet they were incredibly alive through things like the fennel, wild fennel, pomegranate, almond trees, and it was just an incredible, it was a very I think that project, and you know, and as Basel was saying, that very often we would see like a trail of wild fennel, and we would follow that trail.
absolutely.
And then 5 minutes later, we would get to the remains, you know. So
Sometimes you find them under you, like
yeah.
you're so suddenly like, oh, I'm standing on the remains, and you look down and like there's remains under you. So it's
that I think was
quite,
for us. I mean, we'd always been thinking about these things, but I think that project really got us to think about it much more deeply, and to think about, you know, what is the relationship between us and all these other non-human life forms that are also part of this, you know, that's also part of this narrative of resisting colonial erasure in a very, very profound way, in a way that is, yeah, I mean, the destroyed villages just became, you know, kind of, we felt almost like possessed by a certain energy that was coming through these life forms. And so I think in this project, it's a lot about the land as you know, as a kind of being. It's a multiple being, and it's also witness. And we thought a lot about I think really thinking about sonic kind of inscriptions that are also held in the land. So that is, you know, this idea of things that are buried, but actually the land is holding it for us. And I think that, you know, it is another being in the work it's not a singular being, it's a
Yeah.
multiple being. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Well, Catherine and I still have some questions, and we at some point were hoping that you could share some videos with sound, but we are conscious of the number of questions that have come in now from the audience. So maybe Catherine and I will take turns in reading them out. And I think it's only fair that we now
and the platform is there online, so
yes, so people can
it's not going anywhere, we hope.
Yes. Okay, so I will just start, if it's okay, with a question from our colleague and friend here at Brown, Shireen Saad, who's asking, how can we decolonize an art world so heavily involved in the very dynamics we are seeking to expose and dismantle?
I mean, I think that, you know, for me, it's really about us creating our own spaces. I don't really have much faith in like a lot of, you know, large institutions becoming decolonized. I think I mean, I think that could happen if there was a complete revolution, right? And I think what Bess and I have a lot been thinking about is, you know, how can we create, you know, the spaces that we want to see that can also allow us to not be captured, right, to these institutions, and to try to exit in a way. So, I mean, you know, part of what we have been doing is we started something called Banaas, which is a kind of, I don't know, a disciplinary publishing platform, which is all about, you know, supporting artists and musicians and activists, mostly now from Palestine, but I think it will expand. And so I think that, yeah, how we think about it is how can we create those decolonized spaces within our communities, really, because you know, I don't have much faith in decolonizing the existing institutions here. I think it's, you know, there is a limit, you know, and of course it is very, it's very hard to be, you know, in spaces that, you know, that, for example, the board are part of everything that we are fighting against, or in universities where, you know, that the patronage and it's, you know, is coming from the very people and system that you're fighting against, right? There's a lot of tensions and contradictions for all of us in that, you know. So the question is, what we can do then, you know, how we can create ruptures and disruptions in spaces for us. So.
Just on that, before I hand it over to Catherine, I mean, I have to say here at Brown, and it was similar at SOAS as well, where it was before. I mean, in terms of the kind of decolonizing push, it's mainly comes from students. And, you know, I think it's so important to have that. You know, it's not going to totally revolutionize the institution, but it is important to have those internal pressures as well. Yeah.
We need to, that's what we were all doing.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'm just saying that in terms of, are we going to be able to achieve that? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think they have a limit, but I think absolutely what we are, I think all collectively, that is the project that we are engaged in, you know?
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see anyone. So
yeah, sure.
There we go. I haven't seen anyone for the last hour.
Okay, well, I think the next question follows along nicely from the discussion. This is from Alex Winder. So thanks, Ruanne and Basel. And first question, you noted the significance of time in your work. And I was thinking about amnesia as both something to be resisted, but also something that somehow frees one from the burdens of the past. I've been reading Diane de Prima's Revolutionary Letters and recall the closing lines from her letter number 12, quote, "For every revolutionary must at last will his own destruction / rooted, As he is in the past, he sets out to destroy, unquote. So how do you think about this tension slash duality? And maybe,
Yeah.
should I carry on or do you want to answer that one first?
You know, I've been thinking a lot about that actually, because you know, we've been thinking about it in a way, it is something to be resisted, but of course it's something that also then um, almost imprisons you, right? You become bound to it, and it's there is that constant tension and duality for us. And I don't know if it's a duality, but I think there is definitely that that feeling of you know, like it's almost like you're in some ways a prisoner to it. So there's a lot of complexities there, I think, to it. But it, you know, it also goes back to how we think about, yeah, to how we think about time. You know, if you're thinking about it as just being in relation to the past, then it can be suffocating.
Yeah.
But if you're thinking about it far more about how it, you know, opens a potential now, and for you know, we think a lot about virtuality, which is that, you know, kind of that space between what is and what could be. So I think for us, it's always thinking about it in that way. You know, what could be. You know, so using that to think about what could be rather than feeling sort of pinned by it.
Yeah, and I feel like that amnesia quality of the internet also becomes a potential to be anonymous, potential to be, I don't know, like to resist capture, to be liquid, to change form and mutate and move, you know, all these aspects. I feel that creates a sort of potential, but also yeah, like a potential from something, but also it can consume you, but it also can be co-opted very quickly. So you have to keep shifting and changing.
Changing, yeah. I think not for us,
and moving.
not being static is very important.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I mean, I hate, like, I relate everything back to, like, you know, being young and being, you know, I mean, you know, not being in the same place for too long is like one-on-one sort of staying safe when you're in Palestine, right? Like, you don't spend too long in the same place. You have to keep moving. You have to keep, because, you know, you're under threat constantly. So your movement creates a sort of evasiveness, sort of, you can sort of keep. And then, yeah, like you go to like disappearance also, and
Yeah.
all that, and yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting because in relation to your work, it really does evolve and it changes from project to project in really interesting ways. And so I see that through your work. The second question from Alex Winder is, your work seems to center collectively, and I was wondering if you could say something about how you think about collective work in the age of the internet, perhaps connected to Nadia's question about embodiment.
I mean, again, I mean, I could go back to what we were saying about how sort of the videos that we were, you know, encountering online were really sort of, you know, testifying to a collective, even in instances where the collective was being destroyed, right? And it was in this virtual space, because you have to think about, why are people even uploading this material? You know, what is happening here? So there was this incredible, what we were seeing was this virtual call and response that was happening. So someone would, you know, sing, you know, a refugee from Syria would sing a song, you know, having been forced to leave, and they'd be in Turkey, and then you'd have Syrians themselves in Syria singing the song, and then it would arrive to Palestine. And so you have this, you know, within this virtual space, you have this collective testimony that's being thread across these different places and these different moments, and it just keeps sort of reverberating. And so I really see, you know, I really see like everything that we're doing is in response and in conversation with that collective sort of threading that's happening. You know, I really try to, I mean, I think we try to resist the kind of the idea of the singularity or the singular artist, or, you know, and really thinking about, yeah, how it's something that's being collectively sung and collectively written, and it shifts and it mutates as that's happening. So.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Nadia, do you want to read the
Yes.
next question?
So Salamir has a question and a comment. So maybe I read out the comment first. I love what Basel said about how the vegetation of the land remerges and emphasizes its own existence on the land, as if the land itself is resisting. I recall a book was written about that in recent years. The gist of it is that even though Israel has decimated 400 villages, you can still see residues and signs that the villages are there. Even the original names of the villages that Israel had erased still exist in the archives alongside Hebrew names. So that's his comment. And then the question, I'm wary about a Platonic division between body and mind and voice and movement as all within the human being. When a Palestinian is at a checkpoint, she's not only a physical body through violence against the body, and movement is immense, but it's also part and parcel of the emotionality and psyche. Would like to hear your comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's what we were trying to say. I think that, like, essentially that it is part and parcel, and then you can't really separate those two, but your natural instinct is to try, right? I mean, if you want to make it across the checkpoint to the other side, and you want to be able to sort of survive, let's say, the next, I don't know, maybe hours, maybe minutes, who knows? I feel that there is that push to attempt to maybe try those things. And I feel that's sometimes what you do have to do to, you know, get to the other without any sort of, with the most minimal, hopefully, most minimal friction. You know, you could also do that and get killed on the checkpoint. So it's not, you're unable to do that. That's the point. But you have to somehow convince yourself and drive your body to cross this thing in a sort of, I think that's what we were trying to get at more than.
No, but I feel like our work definitely thinks about, you know, how, that, you know, like how the, you know, how settler colonialism, you know, actually finds its way into the most minute, right, scales, which is not just like the geography and the land and the water and the air and the, you know, it's also your psyche, your imaginary, your it's very much part of it, and I think that's what we are trying to, you know, get at, how it's, you know, experienced in all these different registers, right? It's not one, and it enters and colonizes the most intimate part of yourself. And then how do you decolonize that?
How do you resist that? Sort of.
So that's definitely, I agree, there is no dichotomy.
So should we move to the next question? And then, yes, thank you for that really powerful answer. So this is from Fares Robe. Thank you very much for this great discussion. Perhaps an open-ended question that's more of your thoughts than an answer. What is next for the archive as a physical entity and concept? And how do you conceptualize your own archive in relation to your work?
I think that, I mean, we didn't get into it so much because we didn't, but for us, what was really interesting and important, you know, during the revolutions in 2010 was the way in which the activists became the archivist, and there was this implosion of the archive, and it was very much through um, kind of archival images and sounds that the power of the state and the spectacle of the state was being splintered. So I think what's next for the archive is how people are, how are, of course, we know there are a lot of issues with the internet, surveillance and censorship. But at the same time, I think it's still relevant how people are using it as an archival space. So I'm really interested in people's practices, I think, and that connection between things happening materially and physically on the ground, and then the way that it has this virtual afterlife, and that's where the most important archives are happening. I think we just have to turn towards them.
Yeah, well, on that note, I thought we're both very interested in the field work that you do as fellow ethnographers, and I do see you both as ethnographers, and you're really out there spending time with people and traveling the land and following people's lives, and so we felt a real connection to your work on in that way as well. And we're particularly interested in the footage of the communal experiences with the women's gatherings, clapping, preparing food, and not only for big celebrations that mark, our calendars in very important ways, but also just everyday rituals that you capture in your work. And this is something that we feel very strong about. The women, particularly older women, their experiences are often ignored, deemed insignificant, not even bothered to be written within narratives and histories, yet they are vessels of knowledge, of local knowledge, wider knowledge, and that are passed down by generation to generation. And so we were so pleased to see you capture such incredible moments with women and older women, and both in your online parts and at MoMA, the installation as well. So can you talk a little bit about your experience in the field of collecting this material and how it relates to the other parts of your work?
For me, so much of the project is like a love song for these women and for their rituals and how much they carry within them. And as you said, I think so much of our frustration was that people don't think that they're important. And it was interesting because we transcribed and translated a lot of the songs, and people would be like, why are you, this is not something important, this is not great poetry, this is not. And yet for us, these moments were everything is in them. And there were also,
because we spent time and resources, and people were just not understanding what it is that we were doing, and we've been doing it for years, and so it took a while for people to be like, okay, now when we put things together, I think.
Yeah, and I think that these sort of what seemingly seem like small or like everyday rituals are actually the way in which people survive and continue. And also they are about moments of joy. There are moments of joy even within so many different, especially for women, right? So many different modes of repression. So I think that is so powerful. And some of the songs, like when we were listening to them with the performers, there were rhythms that they had never heard, and definitely, like, it's not over for us. So a lot of these communities we actually want to go back and do like recordings with and talk to, and so it continues on for us because there's just incredible treasures, really. So in a way, we feel that the project is about honoring these people and these practices. And we also, I mean, it's kind of a little bit different, that there are certain songs that are clearly being performed by like sex workers, and there were people who didn't want to translate, didn't want to transcribe. There was a lot of, and us saying, no, this is a really important testimony. And so, but I think, I'm excited about the call that's in the project for other people to take up, because I always see it as something that is larger.
Yeah, that's great. I'm just curious, what was the food in the one
Oh
video?
yeah,
What are they making?
they're making kibaniya.
Kibania.
Yeah, it's basically like raw meat with burghul, and from the north, so they also make it with red pepper. And for me, I'm from the north, so it's this is like, for me, it's like I'm seeing of a woman.
Getting hungry now.
Yeah. And I spent some time with it.
For sure. I mean, for us, this is like a body of knowledge that we
Yes.
will, like, obviously, to people to see it as that and to use it. And there's an index with the, we want people to use this as research material to create content. And, we're trying to have that fall in the work as well. So
you say about joy reminds me of the work by my former colleague at SOAS, Laleh Khalili, who worked on the politics of pleasure in the context of Palestine, and how, for a long time, there was a moment when, people would refuse to have weddings or celebrations because it was just, the situation was so depressing. But at some point it kind of shifted, and people said, no, we precisely have to have the celebrations. We need to celebrate the wedding and the birthday, and, go to get our hair done. And so this politics of pleasure, I think, also comes through in what you're doing. But I can't help to ask a question. I mean, I know you mentioned it, Ruanne, in passing, but, as a feminist scholar and activist, sort of gender and sexuality is very much at the center of what I'm thinking about. And, when I see your work, and you mentioned, these embodied gestures and embodied resistance and transgressions are gendered. They're also, of course, within a certain system of, heteronormativity. And so how does gender and sexuality I don't know. I don't know what to help.
What's going on?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So how does gender and sexuality feature in your work, if at all, or how are you thinking about it?
I think that we, for us, for example, the queer movement in Palestine has been, really, really significant in terms of the way that it, transgresses against certain things that need to be transgressed, that we can't just leave all those conversations for like, when we can't repeat the same gestures of the past, which was, the kind of anti-colonial national movements ended up sort of suffocating, all these questions of gender and sexuality. And it's been really, I think, for us, like, significant to see movements like Al-Qaws and really think through, decolonial practice that also centers, questions of gender and sexuality, and really thinks about the intersections between, maintaining sort of, patriarchal, the way in which sort of the colonial system reinforces the patriarchal one. So I feel like they're, and we're very much in conversation and part of these communities. And it was really important for us, and that even though there's something so clearly, and you can see, like, gendered in original archive, that we really question that. And I'm interested to see what happens when we show some of it in certain communities in Palestine, because there could be like conversation and tensions there that we feel the tensions need to be there. Like, it was very important for us to, because there's so many sort of dances that are only performed by men or only performed by women. And so it's important for us to think beyond this kind of like binaries that are created. And I think there's an amazing generation in Palestine that is really breaking all of that apart. And I feel very much part of it, So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I sort of think around, Palestinian feminist activists and also kind of academic discourse, I mean, for the long time, for very obvious reasons, I mean, just the focus had to be on the occupation, but sort of patriarchy and heteronormativity was kind of marginalized, and the younger generation is refusing that. That is really quite a generational shift. But again,
when you just bracket it.
Yeah.
I think they're also severely connected.
They're connected.
Yeah, they're so connected. Exactly.
I feel that, like, in the sort of way that we think and the politics in our practice, it was only sort of organically that we sort of had, correlating sort of, we're in the struggle together, absolutely, because that was a natural sort of, not just with the queer movement, but all kind of oppressed and,
Yeah, but all these systems of oppression are definitely
connected. They're connected.
People understand that much
more.
Yeah. And I think,
because we had very incredible women's movements in Palestine throughout, and women were very important in the PLO and the Intifada, but a lot of it did
get buried.
Absolutely.
So we thought we'd have one more question and hopefully play some of your work with sound. And
okay.
So as I mentioned, I went to your installation yesterday at MoMA, and I sat there for a long time and not only experienced myself, but also observed other people experiencing it. And I found that people moved to it and were also moved by it.
Okay.
So people would move to it. It almost started to dance and would get involved into the rhythm. And then once they start to experience it, you could see it was clearly, a moving experience in a different way as well. And so if you could talk a little bit about the importance of sound, of music traditions, of new music, of music making, and how you manage to integrate it the way that you do. And perhaps then you can play something from Amnesia or whatever you want to play so the audience can get a sense of it.
That's also, and we can do a whole hour and a half about the sound in our practice, I think, but I'll try to give a brief sort of, I think that, sound as a practice has been a very important element for us in terms of thinking about the possibilities and the horizon and how you can, how you can circumvent that in any way possible as a mode of survival, but also not just survival, but more than that. And I think that when you think about, in Palestine, your lines of vision are literally crossed off. There's a wall. You can't see beyond this place. It's not that just you can't reach, you can't actually see. And so sound very naturally becomes another porous frequency. It carries frequency and carries other potentials, and is, again, you are unable to contain it. Furthermore, when you move sound into a museum space or into a thing, you also are unable to contain it. You can keep trying to contain it, but it's not really possible to contain it. And then then you take on the body and you take on so that was a very natural or I would say, sort of catalyst in the sort of our politics, essentially. Like how. I mean, I come from a music background, but actually I wasn't, and I was very, you know, I was making music since I was very young, but I never was just content with making music. And so there was something, you know, it was just too abstract for me. But then thinking more about the politics and the daily life really sort of brought back the meaning and what it can do and the potential. And it became a very central part to not just how we think about sound, but actually how we think about image and how we think about our practice. And sound was allowing us to do things that the image was not, which was, you know, denormalizing certain things that had become normalized and mundane, you know, even like crossing a checkpoint, which, you know, one of our first works was, 8 months of recordings in secret at the checkpoint, which we then sort of took and like looped frequencies and created this completely sci-fi sound piece just from the sounds of the checkpoint. And the idea was to just denormalize the space again, because throughout the whole process, we felt how normalized the whole thing had become. And Palestinians were policing each other, obviously, and telling each other what to do so that they can get through. And this was Kalandia checkpoint as well. So they had like gone from sort of soldiers to like, they were like entire, it became like entire border crossing, and you couldn't see the soldiers anymore. They were speaking to you behind a microphone or behind a speaker. So you could just hear them and this machine, and they were just giving you orders. And so Palestinians began to police each other. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot to say about sound in our practice, but I think that's how we started to think about it. But then music and forms of music practices became really important to us, and to like how to circumvent power and how to through sound and through music.
Yeah, that's amazing. I really enjoyed the installation enormously and your work online. And I was really pleasantly surprised how seamless they are. You know, when you go from the online space to the installation, it really works powerfully together. So congratulations so much on your work at Malmo. And I don't think we have enough time to play your work, unfortunately.
No, but it's there.
It's there. I mean, it's amnesia.org.
You
can spend hours on it, or
And if
minutes.
anyone is in New York and coming through New York.
Yeah, definitely. Yes. Speaking of New York, very quickly, Catherine, you want to make an announcement about our event next week in New York?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for launching our gender and body politics.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thank you so much for your questions, which were so thoughtful and really so much that could have been said. So I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much. And next, on May 5th, we're having our first in-person event. So you've launched the series, and the next event is with Morasheen Alayari and Mani Nikiliani. And they are going to perform together their piece called Moonface. And Mani will play a set, and then they'll play together at Symphony Space. And then Morasheen will also be speaking. And there'll be a Q&A afterwards. And that's at 6 p.m. at Symphony Space on May 5th. So please join us. And thank you to everyone in the audience.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we will have a recording of this event that you can share with your friends and colleagues and students. That should be available in a few days. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.